the folks that aren't stacking sats or kind of have their real estate, and actual, cash flows and everything. Folks that are dependent on pensions, folks that are dependent on 401ks and traditional retirements are most likely going to suffer the consequences of a hyperinflationary scenario at scale across the globe.
Bitcoin Well is a non-custodial Bitcoin platform in Canada and the USA. That means every single Satoshi you buy goes straight to your self-custody. They offer free withdrawals, a simple 1% spread, and they have the Bitcoin Wishing Well, where you can win up to 1,000,000 Satoshis by earning points and throwing the coin in the well. In fact, you get 5 coin tosses to the Bitcoin Wishing Well when you sign up at bitcoinwell.com/pastorcoin. Welcome to another episode of the Bible and Bitcoin. I am your host, Alan Armstrong, aka Pastor Coin, and today we have a special guest, as we usually do, Normies in Shambles. Welcome to the Bible and Bitcoin podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk shop here.
So before we get into business, all the people want to know, well, I want to know, and I'm sure there's others too, but where did Normies in Shambles come from? How did that arise?
So, in a previous Twitter life, I had a saying where it was normies in disbelief, and that was pre-bear market, kind of FTX time, euphoric market where the price of Bitcoin and the market as a whole was kind of going through the roof. Bear market from about 20K to about 25. I was in PubKey quite frequently. And then as I was talking to Mitchell Hoddle, we kind of came up with the name for Normies in Shambles, mostly because of the way sort of, there was like a geopolitical rift. They were still in sort of shams because there was no they still thought the price was going to 14K to 10K at the time, and I kind of missed memeing, and this was kind of like the perfect storm to get back in action.
So there's lots of doom and gloom going on. People calling for the end of the world and a Great Depression, a recession that will be worse than the Great Depression, and there's just so much doom and gloom. So I wanted to ask you, what is your macroeconomic outlook for, let's say, the next 10 years, 20 years? What's your long-term outlook here? Are we headed for a cataclysmic end, or are we going to just kick the can down the road for another couple decades?
I personally think that central banks are going to try to kick the can down the road. You're kind of seeing it now with the way that they're treating interest rates, and it's ultimately going to end in a very abrupt fashion where the folks that aren't stacking sats or kind of have their real estate and actual cash flows and everything, folks that are dependent on pensions, folks that are dependent on 401ks and traditional retirements are most likely going to suffer the consequences of a hyperinflationary scenario at scale across the globe, while those who were able to sort of preserve their time and stack sats at all facets of the market, I think that class of humanity will be the ones to kind of set the tone and get things sort of back on track after that sort of cataclysmic financial crisis that will likely come in the next decade if government spending and debt persist.
So you're an American, I presume. What is your outlook for this presidential election? Because it looks like now I know every 4 years it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most important election ever. Um, but this one seems like it might be, or maybe it's not. I don't know. Maybe I'm buying the hype. What do you think about this? Is this just another most important election, air quotes, or is this actually a pretty important one?
It's it's important in the context of, do we delay the inevitable, which is the ultimate sort of collapse of the U.S. dollar. I think having a more conservative administration, we kind of prolong that. Um, so instead of maybe what I would assume being 2028 as the time where we see the financial markets really collapse to an equal or greater extent than 2008. We could see that being prolonged, and then, probably mid next decade, you know, kind of being that next time. But again, that can always change if we get a conservative administration to at least be in for an extended period. We saw kind of the strength of our U.S. dollar improve under the Trump administration in 16, and outside of the pandemic, spending and printing was kind of forced to go through the roof, with almost 20 to 30% of existing money supply being printed in that year. So, if we can keep printing down in the next administration and keep spending down, keep taxes down, bring innovation back into the U.S., I think we'd be in great shape compared to where we're at today. But again, inflation is kind of stuck at that 3% level, where it used to be 1.5 to 2% on average, and 3% is that's including them sort of cooking the books, so to speak.
It seems like there's two options here. We either print our way to zero or cut our way to zero.
Hmm.
It both ends at zero,
Hmm.
but in your opinion, is there a, a preferred option? Would you rather print to zero or cut to zero, or does it not make a difference?
So personally, I'd rather cut the spending to zero. Because at least we're kind of limiting tax expenses. And if, although we'll have inflation go through the roof, which is just another hidden tax, at least at the sort of normie level, where they're seeing the monetary numbers kind of stay consistent, where their monetary units are, you know they're seeing that they have six figures in their account, and they can actually do something with it, as opposed to seeing six figures in their account and you know barely being able to afford lunch. So, um, you know personally, if the government can kind of keep the the, the rates down with the Fed, and kind of make make things sort of comfortable. It kind of reminds me of this sort of analogy just came to mind, where we're kind of at the last few days of you know the of it could be a pet's life, right, where you could end up you know putting it to sleep, um kind of kind of having an ease into that. A comfortable ending would be ideal,
Mm.
um, as opposed to kind of
Yeah.
going.
How do we put how do we put the fiat system to sleep?
Mm.
How do we transition with the least amount of pain, I think, is the question we should be asking
Mm-hmm.
because, I mean, I'm asking the questions, so I guess I should get my questions better. But
Mm-hmm.
it seems like to me that's what I'm constantly thinking about is how can we transition to a hard money standard, preferably Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
in the least amount of pain. Have you thought of that? Do you have any
Mm-hmm.
ideas as to how that might happen?
Yep, and and we do have the playbook with kind of how El Salvador approached their sort of reset. They added Bitcoin as legal tender. They also, added it to their, you national balance sheet and their reserves. They're mining it. They're kind of making it accessible for all the citizens with their own app and everything. So the Chivo app, if the U.S. can follow suit with instead of something now this could be maybe 4 or 5 cycles from now, but this is the goal where you kind of instead of subsidizing things like electric vehicles for the population, you subsidize Bitcoin mining,
Hmm.
and you kind of put Bitcoin at on the balance sheet at the state and local level, as well as the federal level. You got to instead of subsidizing school projects that could be, which this is a true story. There was a school that had it was a five almost like $500 million school, almost $1 billion school project, lasted about 10 years,
Hmm.
and so they hired all this staff. They hired, um, you know, even like the cafeteria staff, teachers, everything, and then they realized that they didn't have the money on hand to um, operate the school on an annual basis.
Wow.
Uh, so that's sort of the problem I'm seeing with the local governments is they get this money from the federal government and they're not really allocating it properly. They're spending it because they have to, and then or else they wouldn't get it. So they're getting it to spend it, and they're typically spending it on partners and sort of suppliers that they're in cahoots with. So they're kind of naming their price. So you've got things like, um, for example, you know to pave the streets around here, it went from around $1 million per mile to I believe we're near 2.5 to $3 million per mile. Um, Things like putting in screws for signs, it's $80 a screw. That,
Oh my gosh.
um, and that was years ago. So I've kind of mostly through the people I connect with in town and around just my day to day and kind of talking with colleagues, we we're kind of piecing together this picture where you know honestly there's way too many people that are distracted from what what is really happening with our money and with the the sort of value of our time and the effort that we put into each and every day.
It seems the same in Canada. No, it is the same, but worse. I'll put it that way. Any government job you have is not incentivized to, how do I say this? People who work for the government are not incentivized to do a good job, basically, because they get this funding, like you said, and whether or not they spend it well or turn a profit or do good with the programs that they're supposed to be running makes no difference
Hmm.
because next budget they're just going to get the money again.
Yep.
And so there really is no incentive to do a good job. There's actually an incentive to pad your own pockets
Hmm.
because if you don't spend the money, you don't get the money. So it really is a twisted way of doing business. And people always ask me, if we don't have taxes, who will pave the roads? What about healthcare? What about this? Well, if we didn't have taxation funding these things, we would have private institutions and people providing these things at a much better cost and with better value.
Yep.
So do the math. It's
Yeah.
not that hard. $80 a screw? Are you kidding me? I have a drawer in my garage filled with screws, free. I don't even know where they came from. Everyone has a screw drawer, right? Where did
Yeah.
these screws come from? I don't know, but there they are,
Yeah.
free, not $80.
Hmm.
So, anyways,
Yeah.
let's talk about, or do you have a comment
Mhm.
on that?
Yeah, and to kind of tack on the taxation portion, and this could act as a pretty solid transition. Um, taxation at current level only really became prevalent after the creation of the Federal Reserve System. Um,
Interesting.
so the days of having roads and infrastructure, sure, there were some private and public um, projects, but for the most part, and I actually wrote a piece about this a while ago, infrastructure was private. The Chrysler Building, for example, in the city was one of the largest private projects. The Empire State Building was a public-private project between DuPont and the state of New York. Um, Things like the railroad, transcontinental railroad, that was mostly public, but again private with the oil barons and such. So it was still, um, and you know for the most part there was that mostly private, somewhat public. Now we're trending towards entirely public, and that's becoming very very problematic because of things like the $80 screw as we uncovered.
Unbelievable. I wrote The Bible and Bitcoin for you, Bible believing Christian, and in it I lay out the biblical basis for what money is, why our current fiat monetary system is ungodly, and how Bitcoin is the best and most viable, biblically compliant replacement for government fiat money. There's even a small group study guide in the back with additional resources to study with your church small group. Get it on Amazon or pay with Bitcoin at thebibleandbitcoin.com for a discount. So, does fiat money, and this is a topic that seems to always come up on these podcast episodes when I'm talking with guests. So I just decided to bring it up myself because we'll get there eventually, I'm sure. But do you see a connection between fiat money, the way it's set up today, and societal decay? Because it seems like, morally speaking, things are just getting a lot weirder than you could imagine. When I was in high school, which was not that long ago, you know, less than 20 years ago, it does not look like it does now.
Mhm.
Morally speaking, we have fallen a big way. So, do you see that connection
Mhm.
between societal decay and increasing inflation, and as fiat begins to unravel?
Yep, entirely. So a byproduct of having the sort of fiat standard that we currently have is, um, government is your parent now. Um, they're your parent from when you're in pre-K all the way till the day that you're gone. You know, you're up in heaven, right? So they're
Mm.
they they kind of pull you away from your parents, your biological parents, because of their chase for money, right? So as a result, you're stuck in the public, especially if your parents can't afford a private school or homeschooling. You're stuck in the public system, and you're stuck with the sort of byproduct of the indoctrination of the state. Um, and you know, sure, when we were kids, you know, God was still pretty prevalent in the public school system, um, and our money was still kind of in a better position, right? So if you were able to kind of spend quality time with your parents, learn from them, learn from your older siblings, learn from your grandparents and such, you you were you were kind of able to get that set of traditional values to persist, and that's and it also depends culturally too. So there are religions where Christianity, for example, right, bestows very strong core values, and if you follow them, you're in good shape. Um, but again, a lot of people get pushed away from God. They get pushed away from family to chase fiat as they get older. It's all about work, 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 make money, cash flow, stay above the inflation rate, things like that, and then you end up losing sight on your overall purpose as a person. Whereas under a sound money standard, you're able to focus on true values, sound values, and kind of scale that out and focus on what you thoroughly enjoyed doing, right? And true hobbies and creativity as a human. So, um, the fiat system it's only going to get worse, and even all the way back from Sodom and Gomorrah, right? The further they got away from God, the worse off they got, and we're definitely trending that way.
So yeah, I don't like the trajectory we're going here.
Hmm.
It's not good for the family. It's not good for the family.
Right. When because we're seeing the the female take on the male role and the male take on the female role. Um, Not across the board, but it is becoming more apparent where um, you know we're we're seeing we're seeing that, right, that it's in some cases it might make sense, where, but for the most part it's it changes the sort of setup where you would have a traditional nuclear family, and that's dwindling day by day now.
Yeah, I went to the dump and it was like all young women.
Mm.
It was all young women at the dump. I told my wife, I said, these feminists better not ever tell a man to take out the garbage ever again. Because if you're going to take the jobs at the dump, then you could take the trash out too.
Mhm.
It just rubbed me the wrong way. I'm like, man, these young girls should not be working at the dump. They should not be shoveling trash and all this type of stuff. But you know what? Can you really blame them?
Mhm.
What other options do they have in this system?
Well, yeah.
Right? These are high-paying city jobs,
Mhm.
and and of course there's a woke quotas that they're trying to fill. So you have to hire a certain amount of women, a certain amount of gays, a certain amount of this, a certain amount of that.
Mhm.
And the straight white Christian guy gets left in shams because he doesn't meet the criteria
Mhm.
for the job, which is not can you do the job, but rather do you fit into a certain demographic.
Mhm.
So we see how fiat money is also sort of skewing work
Mhm.
and qualifications for work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's created a sort of affirmative action 2.0 where it's no it used to be if you're qualified and you just so happen to have really great grades, you'd get that scholarship and you'd meet the criteria. Now you don't even need to meet that criteria anymore. Um, you know, there's there's folks that take a police police test, for example,
Mm.
and and they're failing almost every test, but because they meet this new quota of criteria, they're getting offered that job over somebody that
Yeah. It's a sign of a degrading culture where when the men are asking the women to go fight and
Mhm.
protect the society. This is wrong. This is a sign of degradation
Mhm.
and of decay in society. And I think it can be linked. It's not just fiat money, but fiat money certainly has incentivized and accelerated
Mhm.
this downward spiral of having the women be the protectors and the defenders. It's
Mhm.
messed up.
And again, they did kind of change. They changed again, especially in the military, right? They changed the sort of rules. They changed the requirements. They changed the sort of boot camp scores that you had to get, right, to get to get enlisted. Um, and it also coincides when we're at a period where government spending on military is at all-time highs, right? So government spending's at all-time highs. Partnerships with the military-industrial complex is at all-time highs. Boeing is making record profits. Lockheed Martin record profits. Raytheon record profits, and the quality of their sort of manufacturing has gone down. So,
Hmm.
you have Boeing planes where the windows the windows are are ripping open mid-flight, right? So, and it's again a byproduct of and you know people say capitalism. It's not capitalism. It's a byproduct of the corporatocracy um, that and military industrial complex that's paired with the banking system.
Yeah, whenever I get on the plane, I check. Is this
Yep.
a Bombardier? If it's a Bombardier, we're good to go.
Yeah.
If it's a Boeing, not interested.
Yep. Hold it on tight.
Yeah, yeah. So let's transition here to talk about CBDCs
Hmm.
because this seems to be all the rage lately, and it's my opinion that it's not. I mean, some people think it's a huge deal, and maybe it is, but the way I see it, it's just a software upgrade on fiat.
Hmm.
We kind of already have a CBDC. There's, in a way,
Hmm.
but I don't really think it changes that much, other than maybe some making it easier for the government to keep track of people, which I suppose is a big deal. But do you believe CBDCs are an inevitable thing, or can we stop them from being implemented altogether?
I think so personally. If I think if Biden is reelected, I think we'll be seeing one roll out in the next year or so. Um, in 2021, they were doing preliminary sort of research on it. The Biden administration has, and so personally, I see that coming to fruition if they're reelected. What it does and what it means to me is it's sort of it is re-centralizing finance. It's re-centralizing the banking system and recalibrating it to a sort of surveillance state where you get to pair your social score with your monetary banking. That's currently what's happening in China. They're doing little perks here where if you pay with your CBDC, you get a discount on your flight. But guess what? You're say something incorrect on that flight and you're going to lose your money.
Yeah, you only get a discount if it's a Boeing.
Yeah, and the thing too with the CBDC is it stymies any sort of savings approach
Right.
because you can have it so that the monetary units expire, or can sort of be controlled in the fashion of where and what you can spend that money on, and and the where being like for example the concept of the 15-minute city where you have unless you pay a premium to get out of that 15-minute sort of territory, I'll call it, you're kind of stuck, right? So imagine
Hmm.
you're in a small town, the nearest supermarket may be 25 minutes away. or the supermarket that you prefer going to. If it's outside of that 15-minute window, you're going to have to pay a premium just to get to the store to pay more
Right.
for your goods. So that is something that I personally don't want to happen. I just have that sense that it likely will happen because the current administration seems like it's all about control. Um, even you know, and it's just like ugh, it's very frustrating to see because it doesn't have to be the way. Um,
Your family, your nation, and your world needs strong men. The devil wants men weak, emasculated, and addicted to porn. This is why I designed the Slaying the Beast course to help men take back the dominion porn stole from them. This course will help you discover your identity as God's image, how porn leverages and twists that against you, and how with God's help you can turn the tables on the beast and live free. There's also access to a Discord server where you can have fellowship with others in the fight. You do not have to wait any longer to conquer this beast once and for all. Go to lifegiverchurch.net to get started today. Can they roll out a CBDC and say not have it be super oppressive? Like just say, hey, we're just getting rid of physical cash and we're going to have Fiat 2.0. It really nothing has really changed that much. It's still numbers on the screen. It's still fiat, but we're not going to track you. We're not going to, is that possible? Or is the whole point of the CBDC, as far as the government's concerned, more control?
yeah, and so it's certainly more. So so like for example, the Federal Reserve Act kind of was the catalyst to consolidate banking from the local banks to more regional national banks. And then as a result, we're seeing a recent consolidation of banks from regional into national. So there really isn't that local bank anymore. And with the CBDC, we're kind of going to end up dealing directly with the Fed, right? So the Fed, the Federal Reserve System, and the national banks will be your bank. You won't have a choice. You won't have that personal touch with your local branch. You won't, and you likely won't have full control over your money because they can do things like provide liquidity or you know take tax you, take your taxes immediately from your account. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, because like currently, sure, it feels like we do have a CBDC, like it's like a diet version, right? But it's
Yeah.
there's still kind of some bit of like self sovereignty, but it's trending towards that control, right? They want, for example, Janet Yellen with the $600 Venmo and Cash App, for business, transactions. So things like that, kind of having to report your transactions is kind of lame. And then also on the taxation side, you know, the last few years now, there's been questions on tax forms here where it asks if you've purchased any Bitcoin or digital assets. So
Oh, wow.
um, they're they're hiring tens of thousands more IRS agents to boot. So it's
Yeah. It seems like they're they're searching for pennies in the couch cushions
Mhm.
when it comes to taxes lately. My mother-in-law recently got a call from the tax authorities, or not my mother-in-law's brother,
Mhm.
which would be, I don't know, uncle-in-law. I don't know what. Anyways, he got a call from the tax authorities, and they were talking about their mother,
Mhm.
who has been dead for over 20 years. It's like, hey guys, um, her estate's been closed for 2 decades.
Mhm.
Why are you calling us?
Yeah.
If there was an error, it's done, man. Cut your losses.
Yeah, exactly. There should
But
be.
it's like, how far back are these crooks gonna go
Mhm,
to try to rob us?
mhm.
It's unbelievable.
And they'll go back as far as they can because they need that capital to subsidize their public pensions. They need that capital to subsidize the social programs that, sure, they were great when they were put in place, but they didn't. They were insolvent, right? So they they didn't allocate the pension funds properly or invest properly. So, you know, I think that sort of I'll call it scapegoating, but it's mostly copium from these government officials, where it's like they have to just go back. They're not going to be wise with the money because, again, they they didn't get to where they were by being wise with their money, right? So
Right.
they they took on two or three public sector jobs, so they're getting two or three pensions as a result, right? So that's full salary pensions for each role, right? So it's not like
Right.
you get your pension just for being here for 25 years. No, if you had a role change in a new sort of department, right? So say you were a cop and then you went into like their maintenance section, you'd have two pensions.
Wow.
Or if you were a cop and then went into the mayoral candidacy, right, or ran for office, you'd have pensions there too. Um, in most towns around here, at least. Thankfully, not in mine. Um, at least for the sort of two within the one um, district. But there's people that switch towns, right? So they get the two town the two town combo there.
A double dip.
You double dip.
So let's shift to talk a little bit, and not Peter Schiff. I mean shift to talk a little bit about the Bible, because this is the Bible and Bitcoin podcast.
Yep.
Um, what do you think about Jesus in terms of a CBDC? Do
Hmm.
you think he would be pushing back against it and against fiat money in general?
Hmm.
Why or why not?
So the answer is yes. He would be pushing back against it the same way he pushed back against the money changers um, back in Jerusalem and Rome, and he was also against the usury of money, as well as additional other religions, right? They're against interest and sort of fractional banking. Um, Fractional banking at its core is hellish. It's satanic in my opinion. It creates, like you said in your first episode, it creates that sort of decree of fiat where this money, I say I have this money, but I don't, right? It,
Is it bearing false witness as
yes,
well? Is because I
it is.
always thought fiat money was a violation of "you shall not steal," but as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, it's also a violation of "you shall not bear false witness."
Yeah, exactly. And as a result, though, like, I think now this could be a reason why Bitcoin is what it is, but being a decentralized sound money asset that we truly don't know where it came from. um, it could be a sort of intervention, a divine intervention to an extent, using the technology that man created with mathematics, which God created. Um, so I personally see Jesus as a sort of consistent savior. Um, he saves every day in every way possible. Um, and I certainly have faith that he you know, he is looking over all of us and kind of protecting us, and really won't let things get really out of hand. Um, because ultimately the money is evil. Sure, it says in God we trust, but I think that's more of a joke.
Hmm. Do you think that's a satanic troll?
Yeah,
Wow, that's profound. That's actually quite profound.
yeah,
Because it would make sense because
the pyramid.
the pyramid and all the other satanic stuff, and just the fact that the system itself is run on satanic principles.
hmm and it's very it's a very deceitful monetary system that we live in today. So
Yeah, I think that that pretty much is the best way to put it. It's a deceptive system, and it's deceived a lot of people into thinking that it's legitimate when it's not,
hmm
right? It reminds me of the serpent in the garden when he asks Eve, did God really say?
hmm
Fiat money is the serpent telling humanity, well, did God really say you shall have just and equal weights and measures?
hmm yeah.
When you print money, you can be like God. You can decree value. So
hmm
it's like, wow, this rabbit hole goes deep, and it doesn't seem to
hmm
ever end.
yeah and
But sorry, go ahead.
as a result, right, so we're seeing, like we mentioned earlier, with the loss of the nuclear family, you have people taking on debt that they will never be able to pay back. You have people
Right.
kind of and then as a result, straying away from you know from God and the sort of traditional values, and that's all sort of tied into the nature of an unsound money.
Right. Do you think as Bitcoin proliferates and hard money, sound money becomes the preferred money? Because I think that's going to happen. Eventually, people are going and history has told us that people tend towards the hardest money over time.
hmm
Does that is that going to lead to some kind of revival in faith? Because as fiat proliferates, I see people coming away from faith in God.
hmm
But I see a peculiar thing among Bitcoiners in that a good chunk of them are coming to God
hmm
and picking up their Bibles again and coming to faith and being baptized. It's a
hmm
very strange phenomena, but I think there's something there.
hmm Yeah, and and sort of my personal experiences, like, so I've always kind of had that God fearing way of life, um, but really until Bitcoin, I really wasn't so like spiritual about it. Like, I meditate frequently, I pray frequently, I you know I kind of look at my day from almost like a it's I look at my day from an outside perspective, and I kind of pick up the pieces of like where I felt God's presence, and kind of um, try to bring that sort of energy to everyone else you know that I come across, and it typically comes when I'm trying to teach people about Bitcoin, and
Hmm.
you know I've taught people that I don't agree with politically, religiously. I just focus on Bitcoin. I tell them how it changed my life, and I'm starting to see how it's you know evolving theirs, right, and they're sort of changing their worldview after questioning it. Otherwise, you know, they'd be stuck in the sort of rabbit hole, and
Yeah.
it's so it certainly brought me closer to God, and kind of allowed me to focus on who I actually am as a person. in ways that I couldn't imagine previously.
I was recently talking with a Liberal Party of Canada employee, a guy who works for the Member of Parliament, and I was telling him, look, you can say whatever you want, but at the end of the day, once stuff starts affecting people's pockets, once it starts affecting their bank accounts,
Hmm.
it seems like they throw all their ideologies out the window, all their political ideologies out the window, and suddenly become, you know, libertarian in their views of
Hmm.
money. And I think there's something to that. In that if everything's going well, you can have all the weird beliefs you want. You can think trans kids are, legit and we should do this and go to the pride parades and all this stuff. But
Hmm.
once your pocketbook gets affected, seems like all that stuff goes away and you magically transform into a libertarian and start saying stuff like, "Well, that's not fair,"
Hmm.
you know. Um, so there's this thing with money where a hard money will lead somebody to these principles,
Hmm.
and eventually you discover, oh my goodness, this is ancient stuff.
Hmm.
This is ancient. These are ancient principles in the Bible, and we've just missed it
Hmm.
all this time.
Yep.
So, anyways, we could talk about that all day, but we're coming near the end of our time here. I want to ask you one more question.
Hmm.
In the next, excuse me, I'm going to edit that part out because that sounded weird. Or I'm going to leave it. Who cares? Okay. In the next 6 months, what will cause normies to be in the most shambles?
In the next 6 months, um,
What's going to put the most normies in
the
shams?
most normies and shams. So I will say anyone that doesn't have their sats in order. Folks that are over levered on their Nvidias and their you know their normie stocks. I believe we'll see a little correction in that market as a whole, but as a result, where we're at today with Bitcoin at around 64, I'm still seeing that price action causing a lot of shams for the normies for sure. Especially if we get an official squeeze past this sort of 72K BlackRock, squeeze, short sell off area where they're kind of they're they're smart about it. They're taking all the cheap corn that they can get because they missed out, and it's the normies also that sell into that will also be in
Hmm.
shambles.
Okay, well, we are recording this June 21st. This will come out in 5 weeks. So Bitcoin price today is 64K. What is it now? Leave a comment below. Who knows? We'll see in 5 or 4 weeks. I forget. I think it's 4 weeks. We'll see in a month what the price is at. We're at 64 now. Is that going to sound cheap? Or are we going to be at 80? Who knows? We'll see. So, normies and shams, thanks so much for joining us on the Bible and Bitcoin podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so this has been another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. We got all our links down below. Oh, let me ask you, where can people find you on the internet?
On Twitter at normies underscore in underscore s. Normies and
All
shams.
right. Well, you can find that link in the description as well. So go follow Normies in Shambles. Great account, hilarious memes. You don't want to miss it. So thanks for joining us, and God bless.